No one could remember when and at what time he entered the department and who appointed him there. No matter how many chiefs and various superiors changed, they always saw him in the same place, in the same position, in the same duty as the same copying clerk. So much so that everyone was convinced that he was obviously born that way, as a complete man in the department with a bald head. The superiors treated him somewhat coldly, despotically. Whatever assistant chief of the section simply shoved documents under his nose, not even saying, "Copy this," or "Here's an interesting handy task for you," or anything friendly, as is proper in decent offices. And he would take them, just glance at the document, without looking at who was handing it to him, or whether they were authorized to do so. The young clerks mocked him and made jokes at his expense. Only when the teasing became too unbearable, when they pushed him under the arm, thus hindering him from doing his job, would he say to them, "Leave me alone. Why are you bothering me?" It was hard to find anyone who lived for his duty as much as he did. It's not enough to say that he served diligently. No, he served with love. There, in that copying, he saw some kind of his own diverse and dear world. Pleasure reflected on his face, and certain letters were his favorites. So when he reached them, he was beside himself. He smiled, winked, and moved his lips, so much so that almost every letter could be read on his face as he wrote. He didn't care about his clothes at all. His coat wasn't green, but some reddish-brown color. The collar on it was narrow, low, so that his neck, although not long, seemed unusually long coming out of that collar. Even when the Petrograd sky completely darkened and all the respectable society had their fill and did as they pleased, according to their salary and their desire, when everything started from the creaking of the pen, from the hustle, from one's own and others' necessary tasks, and everything that a tireless person voluntarily takes on, even more than is necessary, when clerks rush to use the remaining time for their enjoyment. Some lively ones rushed to the theater, someone to the street, spending time watching various hats. In short, even when everyone was eager to have fun, Akaki Akakievich did not indulge in any amusement. No one could boast of ever seeing him at a party. When he had written to his heart's content, he would go to bed, smiling in advance at the thought of the next day. What would God send him to copy tomorrow? This was the peaceful life of a man who with 400 rubles a year could be satisfied with his lot and might have reached old age if it weren't for various troubles that strew the paths not only of titular, but even secret, real, courtly, and various advisors. He thoroughly examined the coat at home and discovered that it had turned into a mesh fabric in 2 or 3 places, specifically on the back and shoulder, to defend against flies. The cloth had worn so thin that it had become transparent, and the lining had completely fallen apart. It's worth noting that Akaki Akakievich's overcoat also served as an object of mockery for the clerks. Having figured out what was going on, Akaki Akakievich realized that he would have to take the coat to Petrovich, who lived somewhere on the 3rd floor of the courtyard building, and, despite his bleary eye and pockmarked face, quite successfully patched up clerical and various other pants and frocks. When he was sober and not dreaming up other ventures in his head, he faithfully adhered to ancestral customs in this respect, and, when arguing with his wife, called her a simpleton and a German woman. Climbing the stairs, Akaki Akakievich was already considering how much Petrovich would ask for, and in his thoughts, he decided not to give him more than 2 rubles. He passed through the kitchen without even being noticed by the hostess, and finally entered the room, where he saw Petrovich sitting on a wide, rough wooden table, his legs folded beneath him like a Turkish pasha. As usual for a tailor, his feet were bare when he sat working. First, Akaki Akakievich noticed his thumb, well known to him, with some deformed nail, thick and hardened like a turtle's shell. "Hello, Petrovich," said Akaki. "I wish you health, sir," said Petrovich, squinting his eye at Akaki Akakievich's hands. "And here I am, Petrovich," Akaki continued. Petrovich took the coat, spread it out on the table, examined it for a long time, then shook his head. "No, it can't be patched up. It's poor quality," said Petrovich. Akaki tried to persuade Petrovich to repair it, but it didn't work. No, no, Akaki Akakievich said to himself. You can't argue with Petrovich now. It's better if I go to him on Sunday morning. After a Saturday night, he'll be bleary-eyed and hungover, so we'll have to gulp something to shake off the hangover. Akaki implemented his plan and waited for Petrovich's wife to leave on Sunday morning before going to Petrovich's. Now Akaki Akakievich realized that he wouldn't be able to get by without a new overcoat, and he completely lost heart. He knew that Petrovich would take on the job for 80 rubles, but where could he get those 80 rubles from? He might somehow manage to scrape together half of it. Akakievich had a habit of saving 1 kopeck from every spent ruble in a small piggy bank, locked with a key. So, he had half of it in his hand. But where would he find the other half? Where would he find the other 40 rubles? The situation matured sooner than he hoped. Against all expectations, the chief didn't allocate 40 or 45 rubles to Akaki Akakievich, but a whole 60 rubles, as if he sensed that Akaki needed the money. His otherwise very calm heart began to beat strongly. On the very first day, he went with Petrovich to the shops. They bought very good cloth. It wasn't difficult since they had been thinking about it 6 months in advance and rarely went a month without visiting the shops to inquire about prices. Therefore, Petrovich himself said there was no better cloth. It was hard to say on which exact day, but probably the most festive day in Akaki Akakievich's life, when Petrovich finally brought the overcoat. He brought it in the morning, just before it was time to go to the department. As he went to work, Akaki Akakievich walked in the most festive mood. He felt at every moment that he had a new overcoat on his shoulders, and he even smiled a few times with inner satisfaction. When he arrived at the department, everyone approached him and started saying that they needed to celebrate the new overcoat and that he must at least throw a party for everyone. Akaki Akakievich was completely bewildered, not knowing what to do, what to answer, and with what excuse to get out of it. After a few minutes, all red-faced, he rather naively began to assure them that it wasn't a new overcoat at all, that it was just something, that it was an old overcoat. Finally, one of the clerks, even some assistant chief of the section, perhaps wanting to show that he was not arrogant at all and that he didn't even shy away from those lower than himself, said, "If that's the case, then I, in place of Akaki Akakievich, will throw a party and invite you all tonight for tea. It just so happens that today is my name day." The entire day had truly been the grandest festive occasion for Akaki Akakievich. He returned home in the most blissful state of mind, took off the overcoat, and carefully hung it on the wall, after once again enjoying the sight of the cloth and lining. Then, deliberately for comparison, he took out his previous coat, which had completely fallen apart. He looked at it and even chuckled to himself. What a huge difference it was. Then, without further delay, he dressed himself, draped the overcoat over his shoulder, and stepped out onto the street. At first, Akaki Akakievich had to pass through various dimly lit streets, but the closer he got to the clerk's apartment, the Livelier, more crowded and better lit the streets became. Pedestrians passed by more frequently, ladies, elegantly dressed, began to appear, and men were seen wearing beaver fur collars. Finally, he arrived at the house where the assistant chief of the section lived. This assistant chief of the section lived in a gentlemanly manner. There was a lantern burning in the stairwell, and the apartment was on the first floor. Akaki Akakievich was persuaded to have 2 glasses of something, after which he felt the room had become merrier, but he still couldn't forget that it was already midnight and it was high time to go home. To avoid the host trying to detain him again, he stealthily left the room, found his overcoat in the hallway, unfortunately saw it lying on the floor, shook it, removed every single speck from it, threw it over his shoulder, and descended the stairs onto the street. Soon, he found himself facing those remote streets, which weren't particularly cheerful even during the day, especially not at night. In the distance somewhere, a light flickered from what seemed to be a guardhouse, appearing to stand at the edge of the world. Akaki Akakievich's joy diminished considerably there. Suddenly, he noticed that some bearded men were standing in front of him, almost right under his nose, but he couldn't discern what kind of men they were. His vision darkened, and his heart suddenly raced. "That's my overcoat!" exclaimed one of them with a booming voice, as he grabbed Akaki Akakievich by the collar. Akaki Akakievich only felt them pulling the overcoat off him and striking him with their knee. He fell backward into the snow and felt nothing more. The old woman, the landlady of his apartment, upon hearing the loud banging on the door, quickly jumped out of bed, slipped on a slipper on just one foot, and rushed to open the door. He told her what had happened, and she clapped her hands and said she must immediately go to the district captain. Early in the morning, he went to the district captain, but they told him he was sleeping. He returned at 11 o'clock. He was told the district captain wasn't at home. He arrived at lunchtime. But the clerks in the anteroom forcefully wanted to know why he was there, what trouble had brought him, and what had happened to him. Finally, Akaki Akakievich, for once in his life, wanted to show some spirit and retorted that he must personally speak to the district captain, that they couldn't detain him because he was coming from the department on official business, and if he complained about them, they would see the consequences. Against this, the clerks couldn't say anything more, and one of them went to announce him to the district captain. The district captain received his story about the theft of the overcoat in a rather extraordinary and curious manner. Instead of paying attention to the main point of the matter, he started questioning Akaki Akakievich why he was returning home so late, whether he had stopped by any disreputable places along the way, leaving Akaki Akakievich completely bewildered, unsure if the matter of the overcoat would be addressed or not. The story of the stolen overcoat moved many, despite there being officials who still seized the opportunity to mock Akaki Akakievich. It was immediately decided to collect contributions for him, but the collected sum was quite insignificant, as the officials had already spent much, some for the chief's portrait, some for some book at the suggestion of the department head. One person, who felt pity for him, decided to at least help Akaki Akakievich with good advice, which Akaki followed. And so, Akaki Akakievich decided to go to the high-ranking official. What exactly the duty of the high-ranking official was and what it consisted of remains a secret to this day. After a long wait, Akaki managed to enter the office of the high-ranking official. "Do you not know the official procedure, respected sir?" continued the high-ranking official sharply. "Where have you ventured off to? Do you not understand the protocol?" said the high-ranking official. "But, Your Excellency," said Akaki Akakievich, trying to retain what little composure he had left, feeling incredibly sweaty at the same time. "I have dared to disturb you because the secretaries, this unreliable world. Do you know to whom you are speaking? Do you understand who stands before you? Do you understand that?" he asked, raising his voice to such a high pitch and striking his foot on the ground so forcefully that even another person would be frightened. Akaki Akakievich froze in fear, trembled, and shook all over. He couldn't stand on his own. If the attendants hadn't rushed to catch him immediately, he would have fallen to the ground. They carried him out, almost unconscious. Sometimes, a thorough scolding can have such a powerful effect. The next day, he fell into a high fever. Thanks to the generous assistance of the St. Petersburg climate, the illness progressed more rapidly than expected. The landlady called the doctor, who said, "And you, ma'am, don't waste any time mourning. Order him a coffin now because an oak one will surely be too expensive." In the end, poor Akaki Akakievich breathed his last. They didn't seal his belongings or his room because, firstly, he didn't have any heirs, and secondly, there was very little left behind. A bundle of goose feathers, 24 sheets of white office paper, 3 pairs of socks, 2 or 3 buttons torn from his trousers, and the coat that is already known to the reader. But who would have thought that this wasn't the end of Akaki Akakievich, that it was destined for him to live loudly even a few days after his death, as a reward for a life unnoticed by anyone? Yet, that's exactly what happened. A rumor suddenly spread throughout St. Petersburg that a dead official had begun to appear at Kalinkin Bridge and many other places at night, demanding a stolen overcoat. Under the guise of the stolen overcoat, he approached everyone regardless of rank or position. But we have completely left aside a high-ranking official who was actually almost the cause of this fantastic development. The thought of him disturbed him so much that a week later, he even decided to send a clerk to see how he was doing. and if he could really help him in any way. When he was informed that Akaki Akakievich had died of fever, he was genuinely shocked, felt a pang of guilt, and was unsettled for the whole day. It should be noted that the high-ranking official was already an elderly man, an exemplary husband, and a worthy family man. The high-ranking official deemed it appropriate to have a female friend in another part of the city for friendly relations. This friend was neither prettier nor younger than his wife, but such enigmas exist in the world, and it's not for us to decipher them. As he got into the sleigh and said, "To Karolina Ivanovna's place," suddenly the high-ranking official felt someone grab her firmly by the collar. "Aha! There you are finally. I've finally caught you by the collar. I need your overcoat. You didn't take care of mine, and you even scolded me. Now give me yours," said the dead man. Yet at this moment, as often happens to many people of a gallant appearance, she was seized by such fear that she began to worry that she might be having a sudden illness attack. She even removed her overcoat and shouted to the coachman in a completely unfamiliar voice, "Drive home as fast as you can." She barely managed to drag herself to her room and spent the night very restlessly, so much so that the next morning during tea, her daughter openly said, "Dad, you look unusually pale." Even more strangely, from that day on, the dead clerk stopped appearing. Apparently, the general's overcoat fitted him so well on his shoulders that there were no more reports of people having their overcoats taken off. We all have different tasks. The position of these tasks can determine the monetary value, perhaps even the moral value. But humanity is not dependent on the position, but rests on the pillars of kindness, understanding, and respect.